After 65, you have no room for error. All you've managed to gather is your last line of defense, and if it falls, what then? My name is John Woods, and this is the story of how I lost everything. Not because of war, not because of illness, not because of old age, but because of the man I trusted more than anyone in the last 20 years. Because of my financial advisor. I live in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A gray house with peeling paint, a backyard where branches have been begging for a saw for a long time, and a creaky porch are my kingdom. Almost all of my life has been spent here. My wife died 5 years ago of lung cancer. My daughter Linda lives in Texas and rarely calls. And I just count my pension dollars and wait for something to change. One morning I found a letter in the mailbox. In a well-printed envelope, the Horizon Capital Partners logo, and my name at the bottom, spelled correctly, which already inspired confidence. Inside was a flyer: optimize your savings. Safely. Respectful of your age. That's how I met Brad Hansen. Slim, with a Hollywood smile, gray hair only on his temples, for solidity, as he joked. He came to my house with coffee like an old friend. His voice was calm, his gestures slow, like a doctor or a priest. I, an old fool, believed him. "Mr. Woods," he said, "today you are earning less than you deserve. Let me change that." I didn't want to hear any more about inflation, about risks, about keep it in the bank like your grandmother. I wanted to live. I wanted to travel. A good dinner. Maybe falling in love again, damn it. Brad talked about it like he could read my mind. Linda had her doubts. When I first told her that I had transferred some of my savings account to the Horizon Growth Yield Fund, she was silent. Then she asked, "Dad, have you checked it out? Am I choose it registered?" I was offended again. I'm not stupid, Linda. I'm old, but I'm not soft in the head. For the first 3 months, everything was perfect. I received charts in my mail that I didn't even understand, but they looked convincing. $350 a month was deposited into my account. Core investment dividends, Mr. Woods. I even started to think about taking a cruise to Alaska. And then there was silence. 1 month, nothing. Brad said, "Technical error, already fixed." The second month, silence again. Now his phone was dropping the call. And the third. There was another office in his place. A video game store. I was sitting in my chair, holding an empty cup of coffee and looking out the window. And my head was buzzing. I'm too old to be wrong. But I was wrong. I lost $35,000. Everything I had saved since I was 42. My pension plan. My security. But the worst was yet to come. Because the truth about Brad isn't just painful, it's sickening. And it's not alone. And he's not the only one. He's just the tip of an iceberg that has long since pierced my world to the bottom. Do you know what silence is? Not the kind that comes after a movie or a fight. It's the kind you get when you open a bank account and see 3 zeros down. And you don't understanding, is it a mistake? A glitch? Or is it the end? The next morning after my discovery, I got out of bed with a strange feeling in my chest. It was as if someone had taken something away, but I didn't know what it was yet. The old instinct was to put my coffee in a mug, my slippers, my laptop. I opened the online bank and there was a number. $29.17. $20. Everything else was gone. Then I refreshed the page several times. Then I got up and walked around the room. Then I sat down again and sat there. I don't know how long. I don't remember if I screamed. I don't think so. I think I just sat there and squeezed the mouse until my hand went numb. I found Brad's business card. Horizon Capital Partners. Your money is your peace of mind. I dialed the number. The dial tone rang. And then a short automated voice. This number is no longer in service. I tried again and again. Then I called the help desk. I'm sorry, this company no longer exists. I felt dizzy. I held on to the armrest because I was afraid of falling. And inside, something similar to panic was starting to set in. It was an old familiar one, from the time I learned about Martha, my wife's illness. And only now it was a different loss, less visible, but no less devastating. I started checking the documents, contracts, printouts, those damn profit charts. Everything looked convincing, even too convincing. And then I realized I don't even know where the money went. There is not a single trace. Everything is in electronic form. Everything is invested. I called Linda. It took me a long time to get up the courage. She answered from work with keyboards clicking and someone laughing in the background. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" I couldn't speak. I just mumbled. "I need to talk. The money, it's gone." She stopped instantly. "Anna, what are you talking about?" "What money?" "All of it. From the pension. From the account, everything." Was a pause and then silence. For about 5 minutes. Only her breathing in the phone. She wasn't crying. She didn't even scream. She just said, "Asked you. I warned you." I wanted to say that I was ashamed, that I was thinking about her, that I wanted to be strong, not a burden. But I didn't say anything. Alakua, because it wouldn't change anything. Because all my words are now cheaper than my bill. The next day I went to the local police station. A young officer with a hairstyle like a soccer captain listened to me with polite indifference. He knew, and I showed him the papers. He nodding. There are many such stories now, especially among pensioners. They do everything beautifully. Most likely it's an international scheme. We will pass the materials to the federal department. "Amadou, what should I do?" I asked. He just shrugged his shoulders. "You're lucky you still have a roof over your head." I went home, lay down on the old couch, and just looked at the ceiling. For the first time in my life, I felt that I was no longer in charge, that my role was over, that I was superfluous. Words were running through my head, 3 zeros down. I lost more than just money. I lost the illusion that I still had my life in my hands. But I didn't know that Brad had disappeared for a reason, and that I wasn't the only victim. There were others, and one of them was an old friend of mine, and he knew something. Something that would make me do something I'd never done before. Tastes change with age. I used to drink coffee with 2 spoons of sugar. Now I drink it bitter, almost black. Not because it tastes so good, but because life has become like that without sweeteners. The next morning I woke up before the alarm clock. It always happens when your brain won't let you sleep. I don't remember ever making coffee so early. It was still dark, and I was already sitting in the kitchen, wearing an old bathrobe, holding a cup that had cracked 5 years ago. The coffee was sugar-free. Not because I didn't have sugar, I did. I just didn't feel like having anything nice. The phone rang for about 10 minutes. I didn't want to answer it because I guessed who it was. But when I saw the name on the screen, Frank from the bowling alley, I pressed answer. Anyway. "Ray, did you hear the news? There's some shit going on with Brad. People have started talking. I have someone who wants to meet you." I didn't immediately understand what he meant. But the words, "someone wants to meet," sounded like an invitation to another reality. I was already at the bottom, so it couldn't get any worse. We agreed to meet at the Rusty Spoon, a cafe that serves the worst omelette in town, but gives you free coffee if you stay long enough. I arrived 15 minutes early, just to look at the people, because I haven't seen people properly in a long time. Joe was a gray-haired, short man with a crooked finger and eyes that never laughed. He didn't shake hands, just nodded and sat down. He pulled a tattered envelope from his pocket. "Are you Ray?" "Yes. I was told you were hurt too." He didn't ask how much I had lost, because he didn't care. He had lost much more himself, his house, his wife, his respect. But he had something I didn't, the motivation to dig. Brad was not alone. This is not just an investment advisor. It's part of a scheme. And I think the top of it is still here in town. I listened as he laid out names, addresses, connections on a napkin. He had a list. On that list were the names I had heard at the meetings, and one of them was familiar from when I worked at the school. Do you remember Calvin Thompson?" Joe asked. Calvin was an economics teacher, dry, neat, always with a tie and an old briefcase. He retired a year before me and seemed to disappear. Oh, and now it turned out that he was also in this investment club. He wasn't just a member, he helped organize it. He has access to the accounts. We have to talk to him. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Calvin. He was boring, honest to the core. But then I remembered his eyes, they were always empty. Like a man living by the book, but hiding something deep down. If it's true. I started, but didn't finish. It's true, Joe said and took a sip of his coffee. No, so did I. Part of me wanted to leave everything behind. Just disappear, drive south in a trailer, fish, and sleep under the stars. But the other part, the part that once taught children to believe in justice, screamed. Because I was robbed. Not just stolen money, they stole my trust. My peace of mind. My old age. I said yes. We would go to Calvin's tomorrow. But inside I knew that this meeting would not end well. Because as soon as you start digging, you find not only dirt, you also find bones. And worst of all, I was beginning to realize that I might have lost myself somewhere along the way. Like sugar that dissolved in a cup and left only bitterness behind. It's a strange thing when you're over 60 and sitting in a bathrobe in front of an old laptop, looking at yourself in the darkened screen, looking not for love, not for friends, but for justice. And after talking to Joe, I came home, made another coffee without sugar, of course, and instead of going to bed for a nap, I opened my old laptop. It was buzzing like a washing machine and stuck every 5 minutes. But I had a goal, and I typed in a search, Calvin Thompson Investments, and I came across an ad. It was simple, black and white, like something from the 90s. Do you want stability in your retirement? Invest with us. Small risk, big profit, and a no stress. Calvin T. and a contact number. And most importantly, the date a week ago. Do you know what it's like when you lose trust in someone? It's like taking a sip of ice water in the shower, your throat is choked, but you can't spit it out. This announcement was just such water. He was not just part of the scheme. He continued to promote it. I saved the number. Then I dialed Joe. He was silent for a few seconds and then said, "We're going to nail him. I have a plan." The next day, Joe and I met at the same diner. He had the same envelope again, only a little thicker, and inside were printouts, copies of checks, and emails. He was sitting there like an old FBI agent, only without the badge and gun, but with an anger that could replace both. "We'll go to him as new investors," Joe said. "We? Well, you. I blow up too easily. And you look like someone who has lost everything and wants to trust again. That's the kind of person he likes." I went home and pulled out an old suit. It was gray, a little tight, though I used to wear it to graduation and to my wife's funeral. Now it was for a meeting with the devil. I looked in the mirror. A shaved face, graying hair, wrinkles that used to hide behind a smile. Now it looked like a year-long anxiety map. I was ready. We met in a small office near the library. The sign on the door was crookedly glued on. Thompson Financial Strategies. It smelled like wet carpet and cheap cologne. Calvin greeted me with a smile. He hadn't changed a bit. Same tie, same manners, like an old dog that had learned to grow with a smile. "Ray, it's been a long time. What brings you here?" "I'm looking for reliable options, retirement, you know." I understand. Everything here is honest, transparent, and risk-free." He gestured to the folders on the table. "Everything is certified, and here are the graphs." I looked at the lines going up like in a fairy tale. But I didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. "Listen, Calvin." I leaned closer. "Do you remember the bowling club in '87? He froze for a moment. Something twitched in his eyes. Then the smile returned. "Yeah, we lost the final then. You broke your finger back then, didn't you?" "No," I answered. "I broke my trust then." He didn't say anything. I pulled out copies of Joe's documents from my folder. His face turned like marble. "You don't understand, Ray. It wasn't me. I was just a consultant. The real schemes were in other hands. But you're still putting out the ads. You're still luring people in. Because I have nowhere else to go." he exploded. I'm being kept in this. I'm trapped. If I leave, they will destroy me. You have no idea who we're dealing with. His voice grew quiet. He looked at the door, then at the window, as if someone was listening. If you go away now and forget everything, you can still sleep. But if you keep digging, you won't be the only one to get hurt. I left the office holding the same documents, but now with a head full of questions. If Calvin was just a cog, who was behind everything? And most importantly, am I really ready to find out? Because the truth is not sugar in coffee. It doesn't sweeten. It burns. There are doors that seem normal at first glance. Beautiful, lacquered, with a sign. But when you get closer, there is no handle. You poke, push, but you can't get in. And it was through such a door that I found myself. Right in the middle of the night, with a cold in my chest and a head full of questions. It was 2 a.m. I was lying on the bed in my pajamas with coffee stains when the phone rang. It was an old phone with the same jangly ringtone I'd never changed. "Joe," I said. "Right away. It can't wait until morning." His tone was the same as when we were younger and caught Jerry stealing from the cash register at the Veterans Club. Back then, he was direct, sharp, and knew exactly what to do immediately. I put on my old boots, pulled on my coat, and got in my Toyota, which had already asked for retirement before I did. Joe sent me the address. I read it aloud, 95th Street, East Side. A building without a sign. And I didn't ask anything. I just drove over. When I arrived, I immediately realized that something was wrong. It was not an office building. It was a cross between a former factory and a warehouse, with high concrete walls and windows boarded up with wooden panels. Joe was waiting by the door. He was smoking, nervously tapping his foot. There were meetings here. Not Calvin. Are you sure? Are you sure? Or you'll see for yourself. He pushed the door open. It wouldn't budge. It was as if someone was holding it from the inside. There's no handle, Joe whispered. We walked around the building. Again, there was another door in the backyard. No handle. Just a keyhole, but on the inside. They don't want anyone to come in here, I said. On the concrete wall was a sign, faded but still legibling. Keep quiet. Cameras are working. Joe tapped his ear. He had a tiny earpiece. Recording is in progress. I remained silent. My head was spinning. Why? Who? What is hiding here? And then a sharp beam from the roof. A flashlight. Someone had turned on a searchlight and pointed it right at us. Joe grabbed my hand. Let's run. Now. We ran across the street like teenagers after a prank. The Toyota started the second time. I pressed the gas without turning around. At the gas station, we caught our breath. We bought coffee from the vending machine, this time with sugar. Joe was silent. I didn't say anything either. It was only after a few minutes that I asked him, "What was that?" "That, my friend, is a door without a handle. You can knock, you can break in, but if they don't want to let you in, they won't." So what were we looking for? Footprints, and we found them. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. On it was a list of names, familiar names, old friends, partners. They were all in on the scheme, not victims, a complice. You think Calvin wasn't working alone, and he's just a face, an idiot with a smile. The real players are in the shadows. I ran my eyes down the list. One name stood out. "You're kidding, Jack? That's the one. Your bowling buddy, the one who advised me last year to co-invest in a new life." Something broke inside me. Jack was the one I let into my house. He was the one I would sit on the porch with and talk about old times. He laughed at my jokes. "And now, we have to get to the root of this," Joe said, "or it's going to keep going. And you know what? You're not just a victim anymore, Ray. You're a witness. Maybe more than that." I looked at the road ahead. It was dark, with puddles and broken asphalt. But I knew there was no turning back. Every pensioner has a weakness. Some have a TV. Some have a garden. Mine was cinnamon rolls. I couldn't pass by the Sophie and Sons Bakery without looking inside. But that day, the pastries tasted different. The taste of betrayal, spreading like melted cream on a pie. I came there every Wednesday. I took my 2 buns, black coffee, and a conversation with Sophie, who knew who was sick with what, who broke up with whom, and who got into what scam. Her bakery was like a local psychologist's waiting room, but instead of a couch there were high stools. This time Sophie didn't say hello. She just took a quick glance and turned away. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sitting down by the window. "Everything is as usual," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Not really." I waited for her to continue, but she was silent. I took a sip of coffee and shivered. It was cold. No, and a few minutes later, a man walked into the cafe. He was tall and wore a dark coat. He didn't look at me, but I recognized his voice immediately. "Jack. The same Jack whose name I had seen on Joe's list yesterday. Humane, can I see you in the kitchen for a minute?" he asked Sophie. "Not now," she replied sharply. He pressed something into her hand. "An envelope," he whispered. "You better think about it. It's for your grandchildren." I lowered my head. My heart began to pound, not because of Jack's appearance. It was Sophie. She was holding the envelope, and she hadn't given it back. After Jack left, I stayed for a few more minutes. "You know who he is?" I said. "Didn't you know?" she replied. "You always laugh together." I thought he was my friend. Everyone here considered everyone a friend, until it was too late. I took the bun. For the first time in so many years, it felt hard. "Did you sign anything?" I asked. "No, I'm not that stupid." "But you know what my brother did? He sold part of the cafe, for the promise of profit, for these golden bonds." I felt the floor sway beneath me. "That was their scheme," she continued. "The cafe as a front. Calvin used to come here. Jack would bring him over, and they'd sit in the kitchen scribbling on napkins. And I baked buns. A cafe where I felt at home. A buns that smelled like childhood. People I considered my own. All this turned out to be part of the play. A shop of scenery behind which was a fraud. Sophie was looking at me. For the first time, not as a client. We've lost everything," she whispered. "But worse, we've lost each other. Our trust." I left the cafe with the same shaking paper bag in my hands. The buns were still warm. But now I could taste fear in every bite, not cinnamon. And something told me that this was only the beginning. The next step was to return to those who started it all. Not to Calvin, he's just a face, but to those who wrote the script. In the meantime, I was going to the park, where the meeting was supposed to be, and where Joe was waiting for me with news that would change everything. Every house has a window through which you can see the sky. In mine, I could only see the wall of the neighboring garage. But this morning I stood at that window and looked at my reflection. It was not the same as before. Not old, not angry, not tired. It was just empty. Joe was waiting for me in the park on a bench, as we had agreed. He was holding a yellow envelope, crumpled and wet around the edges, either from rain or sweat. "This is all I could get," he said instead of greeting me. I sat down next to him. The envelope was thick. Inside were copies of documents, notes, printouts, screenshots from forums, and something that looked like a photograph. "What is it?" I asked, taking out the image. It was a house, white with columns, a large window on the second floor. "This is not just a mansion. This is an office." They hid servers, documents, money there. But not everyone knew. Only their own people. I looked at the photo and something clicked inside me. There was a window in that building. The same one as mine. But it was not a garage. You could see the lake. And maybe even more another life. A life that we fools paid for with our pensions. "What do you want me to do?" I asked Joe. "You said you had nothing left, right?" he said. "Then you have nothing to lose. And people like that are the most dangerous." That night I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, going over the papers again and again. When the clock showed 4 in the morning, there was a knock at the door. They did not call, they knocked, slowly, deeply. Like in movies, where the hero already knows that everything will go wrong. And I went to the door and looked through the peephole. Kevin was standing there, in a suit as always, smiling as always. "Hey, buddy," he said through the door. "We need to talk." I didn't open the door. I just stood there. And he continued, "You don't want your friends to get hurt, do you? Sophie, Joe, your daughter." And then I realized, they have everything. They know where I am, who I'm with, what I'm doing. I started thinking, if they already know everything, there is no point in hiding. If they are watching, it is useless to fight. But there is one thing they didn't take into account. I am an old man. And old people have patience and anger that has been accumulating for years. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started writing. Not a post on social media, but not a letter to the police. But an article, a story, about how one financial advisor built an empire out of lies. How we pensioners became a tool. How every bun in a calf, every laugh at a meeting, every 15% profit was a fake. I wrote for 2 days, almost without sleep. I poured coffee, listened to old recordings of conversations, but I couldn't cry. There were no more tears. But there was truth in every paragraph, mine, and not only mine. I sent the text to 5 local publications. 2 were silent. 1 replied, "Too long." But 2 were interested. 3 days later, I received a letter in the mail. "Mr. Russell, we want to publish your story, but with the names changed. You understand, for security reasons." I replied briefly, "Publish everything. Leave my name as it is. I have nothing to fear any more." After the story came out, Barry was quiet. No one called. No one knocked. Even the neighbors just looked down in silence. And then I received a letter. It had no return address. Inside was a photo of the same house with a window, and on the back was an inscription. "If you see only what is in front of you, you see nothing. There are 2 types of numbers. Those in plates and those in life. The former are beautiful, round, orderly. The second ones bite like a rusty nail in the soul." And here I was sitting with papers where everything was perfect. But in my heart, I felt cold and sticky fear. That one, because I knew something didn't add up. I looked at the reports again. The same ones that used to seem as reliable as my mother's arms. Profits, dividends, cash flow, everything looked good. But now, after all, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. There's always something small in reports that tells the truth. My neighbor, a retired accountant, once explained, "A small mistake is like a broken button on an expensive suit." And in these reports, there were no small things. Boniaka, not a single tax. Not a single commission. Everything seemed to be sterile. And this was even more alarming. I met Lisa, an acquaintance from my old job. She worked as an auditor. We used to run into each other at corporate events. Now she was retired, but her brain was still working like a Swiss watch. "Look here," she pointed at the document. "See this monthly divide and distribution without any incoming transaction. It's like someone giving away cakes, but the fridge is empty." "So it's fake?" I asked. "It's a brilliantly designed void, but we need to dig deeper. Give me a few more days." 2 days later, the doorbell rang. It was her. Not Lisa, Sophie, my ex. The one who left me 15 years ago. She stood on the doorstep with a bottle of cheap wine and frightened eyes. "I read your story. In the newspaper." I was involved in it too." "In what?" My voice was firmer than I'd expected. But I didn't know everything. I was just doing mailings, processing invoices. And now I'm being summoned for interrogation. They say I'm a possible accomplice. "You were in the office with the window." I interrupted her. "But only once. You have to understand that I didn't sign anything. I was used." We drank the wine she brought. It was sour like memories. We talked until nightfall. About our youth, about how everything fell apart. How she wanted children and I wanted security. How we lost each other before we lost everything else. "Kevin was always charming," she said, "but behind the charm was coldness. He wasn't an investor. He was an illusionist." The next morning I found an envelope in the mailbox. No stamps. Inside was a copy of the contract. My signature was on it. "Is it a fake?" I asked Lisa when she arrived. "I can't say yet. But the signature is very similar. But look at the date. This contract was signed on the same day you were in the hospital after your heart attack. Then I realized that I was not just deceived. I was forced to become part of the scheme. Even if I did nothing, my name is now a shadow. I broke down. I went to the police. I gave them all my documents, showed them the letter, told them everything I knew. But instead of support, I received a report. We can't officially confirm the forgery until we have an examination, the investigator said, and all this time you are technically considered an accomplice. I left the police station with my head full of questions. And then I got a call. The voice on the phone was female, cold, and confident. If you don't stop digging through the reports, the next newspaper will publish your obituary. Yours, I didn't answer. I just pressed record. Because this is no longer a story about money. This is a war. Sometimes the last call is not about the phone. It's about something final clicking inside. Like a door closing. Like an answer that you will never hear again. Like a truth that no longer changes anything. It was Monday, 9 in the morning. The air smelled of yesterday's rain and coffee that hadn't been brewed yet. I was standing in my bathrobe, looking at the old phone on the wall, and suddenly realized that it had been silent for a week and a half. No one has called. No one asks. And you are still alive. But suddenly it rang. With an old phone with buttons, with an annoying trilling sound that you can't confuse with a cell phone. I answered it, Mr. Grant. This is the federal prosecutor's office. You need to appear for a supplemental hearing in the Kevin Grayson case. What hearing? I already went. We have a new witness and new tapes. This is serious. The voice was flat, dry, like a person who tells you that your arm is going to be amputated and he won't apologize. I sat on the bed with my backpack open. I pulled out old papers, photographs, notebooks. I was looking for something, not knowing what. Maybe some confirmation that I was normal, that I wasn't a knave fool, that it all made sense, and suddenly I came across a business card. A name on it, Wilson Harper, Kevin's partner at one point. Then he disappeared. But I remember that he was someone who liked to talk about the golden door to the future. And then, at one of his presentations, he was the one who talked about a guaranteed profit of 30% a year. I believed him more than Kevin himself. I dialed the number. It didn't work. But the name remained in my memory, and I found him. On social media, sitting on a yacht, in Italy, with a glass of Italian sparkling wine and a signature, I deserve it. I went to the park. I just went wherever my feet took me. The people were passing by. Someone was walking a dog. Someone was feeding ducks. And I walked and repeated in my mindy, "It's your fault. It's your fault." And then I stopped and screamed. Not at anyone, just at the sky. A few people turned around, but they were not afraid. They understood. In each of us there is someone who has the right to say out loud at least once in his or her life, "Damn, it hurts." Lana. When I returned home, there was an old car parked on my porch, and on the stairs Mrs. Donovan. She was a widow. Her husband had once been at our investor meeting. Then he disappeared. He hanged himself, she said without greeting me. I wanted you to know. Why now? Why did you come now? Because I was thinking of keeping quiet too. And then I saw your name on the news. And I realized that this is our last call. Either we tell the truth, or it will rot with us. She took a small recorder out of her bag. I can't cover it up anymore. Grant doesn't know anything yet. But if he asks, I'll tell him that we all just believed. Because it makes life easier. It was Kevin's voice. I sat down again. I listened to the recording to the end, and I felt everything inside of me screaming. I had been deceived, but even worse, I was made an accomplice. And now I am a part of a story that I did not choose. When Mrs. Donovan left, I was left with the recorder, and with one decision I will go to court. But not just as a witness. I will go and say that we were all guilty, because we all wanted easy money, because everyone was silent when they should have been screaming. But before I left, I dialed one more number. Kevin's son, Jason. It's Mr. Grant, and we need to talk. And we need to talk in person. Because what I know could change everything. Your life, too. There's silence on the phone. And then a short messaging tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Willow Park, come alone. I hung up the phone. Toot was my last call. Or perhaps only my first to the real truth. Anger is a luxury you can't always afford. Especially when everything has already burned down and the ashes are settling on your shoulders. You're especially when you're left alone with silence, which mocks you better than any swindler. I came to the park early, 30 minutes early. I was waiting for Jason, Kevin's son. Abahu and I sat on a bench, breathing in the cold air and remembering him as a kid. He always wore his cap backwards and said he would grow up to be richer than his dad. Now he is 30-something. And he seems to be richer. But for some reason, he wants to meet me. An old fool who has squandered every last penny. He approached quietly. A nice coat and expensive watch, but his eyes were empty. We greeted each other like two people who had just buried something important, maybe faith, maybe the past. You wanted to talk, he says dryly. Your father's. And something more. Something no one ever said out loud. You think he did it all by himself. I didn't say anything. It was a difficult question. Because if I said yes, I would have bleached myself. And if I said no, I would have destroyed the only memory he still had. I think we all wanted to believe. And that's why we didn't see anything. He pulled out an envelope. These are copies of letters he wrote to my mother. Before everything went to hell. Do you know what they contain? Fear, he was afraid he wouldn't make it. That he had built a sand castle. But he couldn't stop. He had already dragged too many people into it. I opened one of the letters. It was handwritten. It was crooked. Kevin wrote E. I don't know where the line is between optimism and lying, but I think I've crossed it. And now there's no turning back. I felt sick. So what do you want, Jason? I asked. Can I want someone to not tell Meeg, your father is a monster, or lie to me about him being a saint? I want the truth, even if it's dirty. I nodded. I also want to know why you grown men let this happen. I looked away. Because I didn't have an answer. Because we were greedy, I finally said. Not in terms of money, but in terms of hope. We wanted something to work. Because in a world where pensions are a joke and insurance is a lottery, you cling to every chance you can get. And if the price is other people's lives, then, I swallowed. Then you become an accomplice. Often, even if no one paid you. He was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. I was angry with you, he suddenly said. All these years, you were his friend, and you kept quiet. And then you were on the news as a victim. It was, disgusting. I nodded again. I have anger, too, at myself, at everyone. But you know what's worse? What? I have no right to be angry, because I let her into the house. I opened the door when she knocked, like a hopeful. We sat for a while longer. Birds flew overhead. Children were riding scooters, and we were two men with the fragments of the truth between us. So what's next? He asked. You do with your past as you see fit. I'll probably go to the prosecutor's office. I'll tell them everything I know, even if it's not in my favor. Honestly, it's the only thing I have left. He shook my hand, and he walked away. When he disappeared from view, I sat a little longer. And then I heard a short peak, a message on my phone. The number was unknown, but the text was simply, Grant, if you open your mouth, something else will open. And you won't like it. Your home is not all you have to lose. I read the message 3 times. Then I dialed the prosecutor's office. This is Grant. I'm ready to talk. But there is one thing I need security. And for a good reason. Because it looks like the game has just begun. Freedom is not when you have everything. It's when you have nothing left to lose. And while some people are afraid of this state, others are breathing deeply for the first time in years. The house is sold. The dishes are in boxes for Goodwill. Photos are in the trash. The only thing left was an old backpack and a stained map of the United States with a pang. Grant was here. I signed in every city where I used to laugh, and now that it was all behind me, I stood by the roadside again with my thumb up. 45 years of life and not a single thing that mattered. I had $20 in my pocket. I had peace of mind. Absurd, isn't it? But before I left the house for good, I found an old envelope hidden behind the radiator. Yellowed, dusty, addressed to me, from Michael. Michael, whom I considered a friend, and then an executioner, and then something in between. There were no apologies in the letter. There were no numbers. There was no money. There was one phrase written in clear handwriting. I saw myself in you. Don't trust anyone, not even yourself, but live, really. Of all, I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't sure if he was warning me or mocking me, but there was something final in that phrase. And I thought, what if all that remains is movement? Not an attempt to get something back, not a search for justice, but simply movement. I went to the highway. It was 10 in the morning. The air is still fresh, but the sun is already baking. There are few passing cars, but no one is honking their horns in anger. I no longer look like a man who needs something else, and that seems to be an advantage. An old van picks me up. It's driven by a woman in a baseball cap. Her name is Brenda. She's on her way Utah to visit her sister. On the passenger seat is a dog that spoils the air but has kind eyes. Are you a traveler on the run? She jokes. I'm on the road, I say. She laughs. And we drive in silence for 20 kilometers. Then she says, my ex lost everything too. Only he was angry at the whole world. And you're not. It's strange. I don't answer, because I don't know how. But I catch myself thinking she's right. I'm not angry anymore. I have exhausted my anger. I squeezed it out like an old tube of toothpaste. We stop in a small town with a sign that says, population 2,700. But it looks like there are only 3 cats, 1 laundromat, and a coffee shop. The coffee shop smells like bitter Erica and cherry pie. Behind the counter is a guy in his 20s with a tattoo of, "Sorry, Mom," on his neck. I ask if they have decaf. Yes, he says, but it's as meaningless as my life. I laugh. I take a double portion. It tastes like sin. Brenda gives me her number. If you change your mind, we have a barn in Utah where you can sleep. No heat, but it's dry. I take the piece of paper. I don't know if I'll call. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the future, because there is no future. And this is the truth, like a sip of that bitter coffee. I am walking down the street leading to the exit from the city. I am wearing only 1 jacket. I have 2 sweaters, socks, a knife, and a map in my backpack. And this is enough. I am no longer burdened by money, plans, or fear of making a mistake. Because I have already made a mistake, and I have already paid for it, and I'm still standing. And with each step, it gets easier. There will be many more roads ahead. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe I will find a corner where I will become a barista. Or maybe I'll disappear somewhere in Arizona and grow peppers. Or maybe I will be found by those who do not forgive and does not forget. But right now, I'm just leaving. With empty pockets. And a heart that for the first time does not weigh like a brick. Because maybe freedom is not when you have something, but when you don't have to keep anything. Did you listen to the end? If so, it means that this story has touched you somewhere. Maybe you know someone who has lost everything. Or maybe you are hanging on by a thread yourself. Then remember one thing: sometimes to be free, you have to burn to ashes. Subscribe to the channel and hold on. You are heard here.